Hey there, and welcome to the Agentic Voice Podcast. My name is Kristen Ruiz, and I'm here with my co host, Dr. Geneva Main. And in today's episode, we are going to be discussing interprofessional practice. And don't forget to follow and subscribe to our channels on Instagram, YouTube, and your favorite podcast platform. So let me introduce to you our very special guest today, who is actually very dear to my heart, Dr. Joshua Glasner. So, Dr. Glasner is assistant professor of speech language pathology at Delaware Valley University, where he teaches courses including research methods and speech and hearing science. He also serves on the summer faculty at Westminster Choir College's Summer Voice Pedagogy Workshop. And his multidisciplinary research involves broad-ranging topics, ranging from historical voice pedagogy and recording technology to the perception of the singing voice and treatment efficacy. Dr. Glasner's scholarly work has been presented at various national and international conferences and has been published in peer-reviewed journals such as the Journal of Voice and the Journal of Acoustical Society of America. Dr. Glasner holds degrees in voice performance and voice pedagogy from the University of Delaware and Westminster Choir College, a certificate in vocology from the National Center for Voice and Speech, and a research doctorate from New York University. So, Josh, it is so lovely to have you here. I am just excited to hear and learn from you.
It is always so much fun to talk with you, Kristen, and it's good to make new friends with Geneva as well.
Oh, we are so grateful that you took some time to have this conversation with us. So we usually begin with our first topic, which is what's new and what's good. And then this segment, we usually talk about something that we are happy, proud, excited about, or something that's new and upcoming in either our professional or personal lives that we'd like to share. So for me right now, that's just getting back into the swing of things. I just got back from Las Vegas. I didn't do any gambling, but I did some of the lovely desert hiking out there.
Wow.
I don't know if you've ever been to Vegas, but like most people like to go to the shows and things like that. But I just love hiking in the desert. It's one of the most beautiful, almost spiritual. I just love the colors, the isolation. So I did a lot of hiking with my sister almost every day. And then she really wanted to go to Zion Park in Utah.
Absolutely.
Have you been there?
Yeah.
Oh, it's my first time. So we did the 3-hour drive from Vegas area just to go to Utah for one day. And we did one of the, just a climb. Took a good part of the day and came back down. And it was so fun. Like
Absolutely.
that feeling of well-being, you know. So now, unfortunately, I'm having to deal with a little bit of, sleep disturbance because I'm still a little bit on Vegas time, but that was a good trip and I'm glad that we got to do that.
It sounds lovely.
Yeah, what's up with you? What's new? What's good?
Oh, nothing quite so exciting, but I'm sure we'll talk about it. I'm kind of trying to balance my life between a whole bunch of different things. And so in order to find a little bit more balance, I decided to join a new really intense fantasy baseball league, because who doesn't like to relax by doing some advanced statistics on baseball? But what's good, what's new is that I won my first week, and I'm very
Nice.
excited about that.
Nicely done.
So it's interesting that you mentioned baseball because, I'm not a super fan of baseball. My dad is, and that was one of the things that we connected on when we were younger, but baseball has changed.
Oh, totally.
Totally changed. And so I listened to the daily podcast on the New York Times, and they were talking about introducing measures to make baseball more interesting. And they're saying one of the things that has hurt baseball is too much focus on home runs.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And that's what kind of created that, what did they call it in the 2000s when it was all about the home runs and,
Yeah, so they actually called it the home run era,
yes.
which is actually fascinating because nowadays, because of the influx of like analytics, data analytics into baseball, they actually for a while were actually using analytics to teach actually to influence the hitter's swings. And so they would actually, over the past like 5 to probably 10 years, maybe just 5 years really, they and by they I mean like the organizations, would actually get players to change the launch angle of their bats when they would swing, and that actually increased the number of home runs in the past few years, so much so that they actually are introducing rules right now to try and essentially like speed up the game and actually increase the amount of offense even more.
Yeah, so yeah, that's one of the things that I thought was so interesting, that they're introducing a pitch clock.
Yep.
And when I think of a pitch clock, I think of like a shot clock in basketball,
Yeah.
and how that makes things a little bit more exciting because it's like the
Exactly.
time's running out, you know? But so it'll be interesting to see if I get back into baseball because of this, because it really did when they got the cameras to look
Hmm.
at, you know, was it actually a out or
Right.
things like that. It got boring. It's like too technical now, but
Well, and they were taking so much time, right? Like the pitchers would take so much time, which is a really interesting, concept when we think about performance and like what one needs to do mentally to prepare for performance, right? We have these like 30-year-olds who are excellent at what they do, but for a good 10, 15, 20 years, they've been learning how to do this task differently, right?
yes.
And now all of a sudden you're introducing this pitch clock to improve how enjoyable the game is, to
Yeah.
improve the product, but you have pitchers who are completely falling apart now because the
Oh,
task that they're having to do doesn't match the one they trained to do for over a decade. So that's a
interesting.
really interesting like kind of overlap with what we do. Interesting enough, in part of this balance idea, I had a bunch of cancellations yesterday in terms of professional obligations. I decided to go to a baseball game with my brother, and I loved the pitch clock. Other than pitchers imploding, I mean, the game took 2.5 hours, and they went into extra innings. It was a well paced. It was enjoyable, and I think pitchers will learn because once they realize what the task is, they'll be trained to do that.
So do you think it'll be harder now? We're probably talking about too much baseball, but I'm curious.
I
I'm
will never
curious.
complain about talking about baseball. Will it be harder? I know. I think it's a
It
different
is a
task, right?
performance task.
It is a performance task, but it's a different. They will find different coping mechanisms to find ways to slow their heart rate, to refocus on the task at hand. And I think what we're finding is that the teams that were able to train their pitchers to complete the new task are more successful now than the ones who kind of just figured that the pitchers were professionals and would figure it out themselves, right? Which is a nice learning moment.
So do you think it'll be harder now to pitch the perfect game or no?
I think if you look at the younger players right now,
Hmm.
if you look at the younger players right now, they've been doing this in the minor leagues for a number of years already, and they're fine. So I really
Okay,
think it's just a task. It's the specificity of the task.
cool. That's something that we're going to be talking about soon, specificity.
Indeed.
All right, cool. All right. So what's up with you, Kristen? What's new? What's good?
Well, you guys are bringing up flashbacks to fourth grade because my only experience with softball and baseball is fourth grade, and I was on the team called the Buzzards, and they won every year until the year that I joined. And I'd like to think that
Oh.
that is not correlated.
You killed the
But
game. Kristen.
See, we're talking
I
about
mean,
the pitch clock, but in fact, it was Kristen.
I mean, on a team called the Buzzards.
yeah, and when the other ones were like the starlings, the sparrows, these
Oh.
like other things, and then the buzzards. Yeah. So talk about trauma informed approaches. Let's get into it. Um, what's good and what's new and good with me? Well, what's good is that it is warm weather, and I was outside today, and the birds are chirping. The lake is beautiful, so I was really enjoying. Other than allergies, it feels so good. One of my singers said, why do we celebrate the new year in January? Why don't we do it in the spring? Because now it
Seriously.
feels like the new. So, and I really respond to that energy. And then, actually, what I'm really celebrating too is aligned with the interprofessional kind of thing that we're going to be touching on today. Just coincidental, but I actually had Josh, you'll remember, Josh and I know each other from our NYU days. And I had Bill Westbrooks, he's a well-known director, educator, author, come and work with our singers. So it was really fun this week to be able to collaborate again while he's doing, he's doing the acting side, I was doing the voice side, and to be able to collaborate with him was great. So, and I love how iron sharpens iron, and even just talking about the same ideas, but with new spins, new insights, because we're all growing people, right? So how we talk about the work today is different than how we talked about it a couple years ago. So I'm kind of celebrating collaboration and just, I love being stretched in my thinking. And that's what happened this week because of really great colleagues. So that's where I am.
Bill is good people.
He is good people, right? So let's head on to our next segment. We call it Experience, Strength, and Hope. And Josh, I have to ask you, you have a foot in all these different worlds. When you say balance, I almost want to laugh because it's more of a juggling act, I would imagine. So, you're a singer, you're a music academic, and then you pivot into being a clinical academic. So I imagine that this positionality provides an interesting perspective and insights that those of us who are maybe more bounded in our side might not get to see. So can you share with us a little bit about how, about your own vocal journey and how it led you to where you are right now?
Sure. I was thinking about our conversation today. I was thinking back to, when this journey, I guess, started. I remember back to when I was in high school and I had a not so easy upbringing and actually lived with my voice teacher and her family for a good 6 or 7 months at one point. And at one point we were raking leaves outside and my voice teacher would she would have me help with students. She would help her voice lessons. She would have me listen to different singers and see how I might try to help them maybe as this 17-year-old schmuck who didn't know anything maybe, but maybe had decent instincts. And we were raking leaves and she said, Josh, you might someday think about going into vocal pedagogy. Because there are people who do that, and I'm like, vocal pedo, what? And I had no clue what it was, and I don't think I really knew what it was until I started studying it later. Well, sometimes I move a little bit too quickly, and that was the case with my singing journey. I had a good voice, but I was trying to make progress too quickly, or what I thought of as progress too quickly. With some instruction and some of my own choices, kind of got tied up in knots at one point, going from having a very nice voice to not being able to actually make the sounds I wanted to make, or communicate in that way, which was really meaningful to me and actually helped me through some of those difficult times. So in any event, I got to this point where I wasn't able to sing in a reasonable range, or navigate registration or do things that I was expected to do at the time in undergrad. And so what did I do? I started reading because of course reading can fix everything. Well, I started with Burton Coffin's book, and just ate that up. And for listeners who might not be familiar with Burton Coffin, it's this author from the 80s, 70s and 80s who had this whole systematic way of teaching voices that used kind of what we understood about singing voice acoustics back then, which was not quite how we understand it now, but pretty brilliant for 1970, 1980. Anyway, so I read all these books and thinking it was going to help me, and I didn't really help myself, but I learned a lot. And then all of a sudden, I knew all these things about all these voice pedagogy texts and voice science texts and was working through Ingo Tietz's book, and then went to Westminster Choir College because it's a wonderful voice pedagogy program, and ended up, really feeling seen there as a voice pedagogy nerd, working in a lab, learning how to use all this nerdy instrumentation equipment. Went to NYU, studied with Brian Gill, got to work with Aaron Johnson on my dissertation, and that's kind of how I went about becoming, kind of interested and ingrained in the singing voice research world. Well, NYU has a PhD, and that is a type of degree that ASHA requires for accreditation in schools or in universities. And I got after 3 years of working as a music academic, I got this, message from a friend saying, hey, we really need some people to apply for this gig, this job in this new program that we're starting. Actually, I reached out because he posted a Facebook, post of all things. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. And then he messaged me. I was like, please apply. And I had already been thinking about this transition to SLP, really 3-4 years ago, maybe even sooner than that. But I had been speaking with my mentor at NYU, and we were like, you know what, let's just see how academia plays out. This might work out. And then the pandemic happened, and I took another job, and I just felt like I needed to. I've always wanted to help people, and I've always been drawn to helping people communicate through voice. And I just, as much as I love data, baseball analytics, I didn't think just cutting everything and going to another field was the really prudent path. And so this made a lot of sense. So I can work in some of the same areas that I love, work with the people that I know and love, and kind of just essentially continue to develop skills that will allow me to help people with their voices, but just from an additional, perspective. I think I got a little bit off the beaten path of the question, but in terms of the vocal journey, right, there's this path that most of us go through, which is my voice doesn't really work. How am I going to, quote unquote, fix it? And then we all find different paths. And for some of us, it might be that one voice feature. For some of us, it might be taking a step back. For some of us, it might be, learning how to teach. And then all of a sudden, the things that you're learning kind of start, taking life in your own singing, right? So voice wasn't working, found a real passion for voice research, really wanted to expand that skill set to work with injured voices a bit more directly, and now I'm kind of straddling both worlds while I teach more academic subjects, and also get my clinical degree.
You really strike me as someone, from all of what you just said, you really strike me as someone who just loves to learn, whether it's independently or reading books or, doing research. And now you find yourself in a communication sciences and disorders program at Delaware Valley, and you are doing another master's. Well, what do you hope to accomplish? How do you hope to leverage this degree in speech language pathology once it's completed?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I was speaking with a very good friend when I was trying to make this decision, because it was a hard decision to make. I felt fulfilled in music academia. I felt like I had a place. I was finding forward momentum professionally, and I love teaching voice, right? So it was a hard decision to kind of just do a hard pivot. But really, I think ultimately when I was speaking with this friend, it really a light bulb went off in my mind. He was like, Josh, the reason you can't see yourself going down this path or can't fully envision this path is because the job you have doesn't exist. Your job you're going to have in 5 years doesn't exist yet, because you're going to kind of straddle these two worlds, whether that's working my current position and then building a private practice, or working my current position and expanding the curricular offerings there, right? Whatever is going to happen in the next 5 years isn't something that we can really pin down right now. And once he said that, I was like, you know what? I just need to be myself right now, do good work, and then see what happens, see what doors open, because that's exactly what happened here. I was expecting that I might have to take prerequisite courses, while teaching in music in academia, and then decide later what would happen. But in fact, I got this job, really wonderful opportunity to also get my clinical degree. And so ultimately what I think I'm going to end up doing, or what I kind of low-key hope to be doing.
Put it out there.
Right? I really would like to find myself in a position, hopefully here, where I can be contributing significantly to like curricular and programmatic development, so that we can really have we're going to talk about it today, true collaboration between SLPs and voice teachers who both work from an evidence-based perspective, and kind of train people alongside, much like they do at SVI, but in a way that augments that experience.
So, as you're taking these classes, is there anything that you didn't expect? In case like there might be other voice professionals or singers thinking of doing the same thing. Is there anything that you didn't expect, just to kind of let people know?
And I'm sure you have experienced this to some extent yourself. Whenever you talk to recruiters or professors who are working in graduate school and SLP programs about wanting to specialize in voice, the thing you will always hear from everyone is, well, remember, speech language pathology is more than just voice. And what they mean is, remember, you're going to have to take speech sound disorders and child language disorders. And I was talking with a professor at Iowa last year, and I was like, you know what? Everybody says that, and it doesn't scare me. Like, it's just learning. As you said, I enjoy learning. Will I work in a school setting with children who can't pronounce L? No, never. And is it fine?
But it's good to have the option, right?
It's good to have the option. It's good to know that. And it allows me to appreciate someone else in another domain, right? With another specialty.
Right.
What this professor at Iowa said was, I've always just found it interesting. And I think that's the case. Like, the first thing that I'd say to people considering this path is, you will always get people who say, remember, it's not just voice. And they are totally right. And you're going to have to, work your way through that and jump through that hoop, in a way, right? Not to be blithe, but that is something you have to learn as an SLP.
Right.
Great. But it's interesting. There are interesting parts of it, right? And it really aligns well with the motor learning part of what we do as voice teachers. So there's something you can learn in everything. The thing that I didn't expect, I have no clue why I didn't expect this, was that writing energy is writing energy. It doesn't matter if you're writing a 2-pager or if you're writing your latest research article. If you're writing, you're taking energy from the other. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why I didn't think of that like my articles my production would slow down because I was writing about, children on the autism spectrum, for a random assignment, right? Mm-hmm. So that, I'd say recognize that not that priorities will change, but that like the things that are required of you will increase, and therefore you're going to have to pull energy from different places. And to kind of be, kind to yourself. I could beat myself over not getting 4 articles published this semester, or I could just say, you know what? They're not that far from being published, and I also will have a degree after this.
That is really, really good advice, because I've been living that experience for the last couple of years. I don't know, Kristen would agree, because, when you're doing a doctorate, there's a lot of energy going into writing, and you might be wanting to do more fun things, more performance type things, or music, and the writing. It's good to do the writing, but it's good to do the research.
And I love mm-hmm. the writing. I just wish I had more time and more energy to do the writing that I particularly enjoy.
Right. I totally get that.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that too. From my perspective, working on the dissertation, so there's that writing, curriculum design, then there's copies. I run a private studio, so there's that copy, and that idea that it takes energy, and writing is writing.
Writing is
thinking
writing.
is thinking, and getting it expressed. So yeah, I really appreciate that. As you move forward, are you gonna keep a foot in the research and continue to develop that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have 2 whiteboards full of projects that are being presented at Voice Foundation, or in the process of being developed, or where we're in the process of analyzing data. So I have that pipeline going. Right now, as I said, the writing is a little bit, there's a little bit of a slowdown there. But that's certainly something I intend to do. I'm also still teaching privately, teaching voice privately. Although, of course, I'm not like actively trying to build my studio right now. It's more just maintaining, clients who've been with me for years. And and then certainly even like, I'm teaching at Westminster Choir College's Summer Voice Pedagogy Institute this summer. I'm also teaching at Boston Conservatory's Voice Pedagogy Professional Workshop, or Professional Development Workshop. Sorry if I messed up that name. But those things actually it's really reassuring to me, honestly, because again, I didn't know how my career would develop. And what I'm seeing is between guest lectures and outreach with high schools and stuff, and with research and with these summer workshops and collaborations, everything's still there. I have to be more diligent and intentional about where I put my energies, right? As we just talked about. But I see as long as I'm intentionally, putting things in each of those buckets, they're still getting, ample attention. That was a very nerdy way of saying that. Sorry.
Nerdy ways are very welcome here.
It makes the podcast more interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of research, I think it's interesting that one of the first books you picked up was Burton Coffin.
Yeah, right.
And when I'm thinking about it, you're kind of in that lineage. If you think,
oh, indeed.
I mean, because Burton Coffin had the student Barbara Dosher, and then Brian Gill, and then so you actually come from the lineage of research and enhancing and looking at things in new ways.
And it wasn't really intentional. It was pretty serendipitous, where all of a sudden I'm learning this stuff that Barbara said, and then all of us, of course, I knew that Barbara had studied with Burton. But it's very, and I have a good friend and collaborator, John Nix, who also studied with Barbara. And so it's really, I don't know, it feels, it's a nice, realization that you're connected to this lineage.
Yeah, I actually had the opportunity to interview John Nix regarding his work with Dosher, and it was fabulous.
Yeah.
So in terms of singing research,
sure.
What are you excited about, and how do you see any of it benefiting, clinicians and practitioners, on both sides? Yeah, what are you excited about?
And by like clinicians and practitioners, you mean like SLPs and voice teachers, singing voice teachers. Sure. That's part of my like research portfolio that I'm just trying to figure out how that fits, right? Because I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I don't know if I'm ever going to be the type of academic who's like going for like multi-million-dollar grant or multi-$100,000 grants. I don't know if that's like either in the cards for me or even the right path for me. But I do want to investigate things that interest me, B, investigate things that hopefully will help other people or help us understand things about singing voice science, and also this kind of relationship between habilitation and rehabilitation. What I think is happening is that I'm starting to make a little bit of a pivot with my research, where in the past I've looked at historical recording technology kind of from a digital signal processing perspective. I've looked at vibrato. I've looked at perception of vibrato. What else? I've looked at room acoustics and vibrato. Somehow I got caught up in this vibrato thing. But what I'm starting a project right now, and I think that it's going to be the first of a series of projects that actually looks at tasks that we might have singers or people in voice therapy do, and look at the efficacy, the effects of those tasks. Because in other, we have a couple different things between a couple different tasks within SLP and the singing voice world that have been studied. I'm thinking about, so I'm thinking about straw phonation. I'm thinking about straw phonation in a water bottle. I'm thinking about, resonant voice therapy. But we don't have a lot of like specific tasks that have been studied. We have specific tasks that people say, oh, that works, that's cool. And then they do it. And that's kind of folk pedagogy. And I'm really interested in saying, okay, well, you're doing this type of exercise. You're doing this specific exercise. What are you trying to do with it? What's the desired result? Well, let's measure that result, right? And my goal isn't really to tell people what to do, right? It's not to prescribe, like, here, I want you to do this task with your singers, which is what I think a study of a method would do. Mm-hmm. My goal is really to be able to provide evidence for practitioners and clinicians to be able to say, this type of exercise, this type of task does this. I'm choosing to use it with this client, singing or speaking voice, for this reason. And I hope that type of thing will be useful to clinicians and practitioners. I don't know that it's particularly fundable.
I think you might be surprised.
I'm happy to be surprised.
All right. So we're going to go into our final segment,
okay,
which is the agentic practices. And we've kind of already begun to touch on it a little bit. But for our last segment, we like to highlight agentic practices that help to free and empower voices or empower people who may have been marginalized or experienced trauma. I know you have an interest in greater collaboration between clinicians and vocal pedagogues. This would fall under the principle of collaboration and mutuality in a trauma-informed approach. And I believe it's what SLPs and healthcare providers call interprofessional practice, which I know you're probably learning about and teaching at Delaware Valley. But so that we can clear that up for our listeners, according to SAMHSA, in this principle of collaboration and mutuality, importance is placed on partnering and leveling of power differences, which is a big deal in, I think, the music world, the performance world, and the clinical world, when people have different kinds of training, different levels of training. We want to demonstrate that healing happens in relationships and in the meaningful sharing of power and decision-making. Everyone has a role to play in a trauma-informed approach. And as one expert stated, one does not have to be a therapist to be therapeutic. So can you speak a little bit more about why this topic is near and dear to you, and how you hope to achieve it?
Small questions, right?
Magic question.
Right. You know, I'm thinking about this idea of collaboration, right? And I think back to past experiences. Well, let's backtrack a little bit, right? Like, think back to when we, like, as vocalists, like, found the answer, right, in quotes, for our own voices. I think that at that point, like, for most people, what happens is you find the thing that works for you, and especially if a bunch of things didn't work before that, then all of a sudden that's the answer. And you become a bit of an apostle for that, right? A bit of an evangelist, rather, for that method or that approach. And I think that voice is so personal. Like, this is something we say, right? It's a little bit like kitsch to say, right? It's or you know, whatnot. It's a little bit cheesy to say because we all say it. Cliche is the word I'm looking for. It's so personal, but because of that, when you find something that works for you, you want that, and you're, as a teacher, or as a therapist, you want that for other people. You want to help other people, and so you kind of, it's easier to see things in black and white, in absolutes, right? Mm-hmm. And I think in terms of the collaboration part of things, right, I think that there are less people, I want to see if I can intentionally say, like, really carefully say this. I think that there are less people in our field, broad field, who are willing to, like, fully trust the person in the other discipline, whether that's the voice teacher trusting the SLP or the SLP fully trusting the voice teacher. Mm-hmm. We are taught to appreciate each other's scope of practice. We're mm-hmm. taught to appreciate each other's knowledge base and experience. But we infrequently are taught ways to actually collaborate in ways that will benefit the client in front of us.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that I really think that that's where the bone is buried. Not saying, like, well, that SLP only has a bachelor's of music, or the SLP saying, well, that voice teacher only has a certificate in vocology from NCVS,
Right.
right? I think really being able to appreciate what the other part of the same discipline really offers is where we start to find some real collaboration and real healing for the person in front of us, not for ourselves, right?
You just touched on ego.
Right.
Poked a bear.
Right.
Yes.
I'll move away quickly. So I just think that happens through training, and SVI does a wonderful job of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we can go even further with that as a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we find ways to concurrently and separately, right? If we interweave curriculum so that both singing voice teachers from an evidence-based perspective and certified SLPs learn how to work with voice, professional and otherwise, together, then actually we can be more useful for each other. Because then it's not just okay, the singers are going to learn voice disorders now, and the SLPs are going to learn how to play 5-note scales. But rather, we're actually helping students to learn from each other, to appreciate their own knowledge. And Kristen, I was thinking about this as well. There was years ago, which makes us sound old. But the audience doesn't see my receding hairline, so I still seem young. So years ago, you said to me something to the effect of, I'm going to paraphrase incorrectly or imperfectly, but you said, knowledge isn't a clean slate. Students aren't a clean slate. Knowledge is a tree that you graft and grow onto. Something like that. It was much more eloquent, I'm sure. But
it sounds like something I believe.
but this is, there is going through this process of having a terminal degree, having a profession, having a career, and then kind of backtracking, but kind of not, and also taking prerequisite courses back, last year, and then also taking clinical courses, courses in the clinical degree. There's so much overlap. There's way too much overlap to be building up walls between these two related disciplines, right? And I think that the key with everything lies in education and training intentionally to foster that actual collaboration, not appreciation of each other's fields.
I think this is really important because, most people can't afford or don't have the opportunity to get 3, 4, and 5 degrees, get a degree in, voice, and then performance and speech pathology and maybe massage therapy and, all the things that people are interested in.
Josh to get my next one.
Most people can't afford to do that. So what we need to do is get better at the collaboration piece.
Sure.
And, in fairness, it's something that people struggle with in, most institutions and most places where people of different professions are working together. But this is why I strongly believe in a trauma-informed approach, because these 6 key principles can kind of prevent the kind of friction, disrespect, or power dynamics that make collaboration just fall apart. When people have the feeling of safety and they trust the people that they're working with, then that's when true collaboration happens for the benefit of, the student, the performer, the patient. So it's a passion area for me as well.
Yeah, I want to speak to or ask about something. I think when we're talking about this kind of collaboration and when we're talking about putting egos aside and suspending, judgment and learning together and giving ourselves the vulnerability to have our expectations violated. In learning theory, we talk about learning is when your expectations are violated.
Right.
And then new space has to be made for new things, but that's a tension filled process that we're willingly putting ourselves in. And there could be a point where, oh my goodness, things that I've said for years, now I need to reframe, refine, and that can be very uncomfortable. So when I think about, as individuals, if we want to go from, say wherever we are to higher ground, one of the first things we have to do is address our identity. Like, who are we? Who do we have to show up as to make this possible? So one of the things that I'm curious about your thoughts, Josh,
Sure.
on like, what must we believe as, voice care workers? What must we believe to make that possible? And who do we need to become to make that kind of collaboration possible?
I'm waxing poetic, right, or philosophical, of course. So it's easier to say these things than to actually do them in practice, I suppose.
But I think language leads to reality, right?
So I think we have to, and this is, I hope this hits home for a lot of people, or else it's just very telling about me, right? I think we have to assume that other professionals are competent. That just because someone doesn't share our experience doesn't mean that they are not competent and proficient professionals, right? And I think that there's a lot of both worlds, right? As someone who's kind of straddling both, and knows that like that statement kind of could cause me to get flack from both sides. I think that a lot of us are incredulous about I like to joke that most voice teachers don't think that there are any other good voice teachers. Right? Like that's a running joke that I have with some friends. And I think that that's key here, right? Like, if you work with voice, we cannot see this instrument. We have really, honestly, relatively rudimentary tools to actually objectively analyze this instrument. There are tools, right? Part of my specialization is in instrumentation. There are tools, and singing voice acoustics. There are tools. There are metrics, but it requires a lot of interpretation, and I think that the first step is expecting that other people will have the same amount of success as you, with a client, with a patient, with a student. The second is who do you have to be? Well, you have to be trusting, right? You have to trust that your voice teacher colleague is going to stay away from rehabilitation because it's not within their scope of practice. And you have to trust that your SLP colleague is going to be able to tell you the therapy that they're doing, that the type of intervention that they're using with their patient, and that when it comes time for them to move from rehabilitation to habilitation, that they're going to trust you to continue that process, right? And that they trust both that each other, that we trust our expertise, and that we do have this shared knowledge that can be used to benefit and to heal the person in front of us in different ways. Right? Yeah. So there's a trusting element, I think, of it, as well as, putting one's ego aside.
Yeah, I think the other, as you're talking too, I'm thinking like curiosity has to be kind of one of the guiding values of what. No one's going to show up to the room empty-handed. So it's like curious about, how do you perceive what's going on, and how do you see the tools and strategies and all the things that we bring to the table? How do you see that informing, and through that curiosity, even if there's moments of maybe some abrasion in terms of how we would perceive it, if I would see it this way, or I hear it this way and somebody else hears it another. If there's that curiosity and that trust,
right,
then I think the other thing is believing that there's a way to come together and co-create new knowledge.
Right. Yeah. Well, and one of my professors in grad school at Westminster used to say, everyone, like, you're never going to learn or run out of people who want to sing. There's always going to be American Idol. There's always going to be, America's Got Talent, right? Everyone wants to sing. There's always going to be the church choir, right? And I think we fall into this scarcity mindset all too quickly. You know, there are always going to be clients. There are always going to be people who want to sing. We're not fighting for the same people, right? And in fact, the collaboration might actually help us to, share more effectively, and increase our, the size of our studios if we need to, or our caseload if we need to, which is never an issue for SLPs. Increasing caseload. So I think that moving away from that scarcity mindset and recognizing that we're all part of the same team, right? And in fact, you and Geneva are a great example, Kristen, right? Like you are a team where you have an SLP and you have a singing voice teacher, and you both have an understanding of each other's domain disciplines, right? And I'm sure, and you're talking about it freely in front of people, which is challenging enough, right? We can. It's not all lovey-dovey, but I think we can find ways to put ego aside, be curious about what other people, what other people know that we don't know, right? And how would that not make us better voice teachers and clinicians if we augment our understanding?
Right. Right. And exercise trust.
Yes.
Like I just remember one of my first jobs, when I first got my master's degree, and I worked with an administrator who had done her PhD in collaboration. And she said the single most important thing to have successful collaboration was trust. Trust that the other person has your well-being, that they're not going to shout out to the world, "Did you know Geneva doesn't really know what she's doing?" You understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, and you respect that, and you sharpen each other. We love to say iron sharpens iron, because it's true. When you're in that relationship where you trust each other, you understand your strengths and weaknesses, where you guys need to grow, and respect that you're with someone or working with a team where you guys do want to be A1 and be on your A game. You trust the process and you respect each other. So I'll never forget that. I think that was, I was able to learn at the beginning of my career, and I think it was one of the greatest things I've ever learned. And also I recognize that not everyone feels safe enough to exercise trust.
Of course.
And so you work from that. You look for the people who are ready to do that. And then you understand that the people who aren't, they might be operating from a feeling of, well, nothing is safe.
Right.
Or, a background of hurt, where it's not safe to trust. And it doesn't have to be personal or animosity or things like that. So that was one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned. So I'm excited to see where this goes over time.
It's funny. So lately, with most guest lectures and webinars and podcasts, I've been closing with the same thought, because I think it's helpful for society right now. And that is a probably poorly quoted statement from Ron Scherer at Bowling Green back years ago at Voice Foundation. And he said something to the effect of, good science seeks to disprove one's own opinion. And I think that when we're searching for evidence, we have to be careful not to be trying to search for evidence that proves our point. Or when we're investigating a topic, it's helpful to try to prove ourselves wrong rather than to prove ourselves right, because our science is going to be more rigorous, and our conclusions are going to be founded on better principles. And so that's I think that's something that's helpful for society as a whole as we continue to learn how science changes and evolves, and good for us as practitioners and clinicians as we seek to use evidence to inform our own practice. Right? It's easy to find things to. My grandfather used to say, "Smart people can convince themselves of anything."
Very cool. All right. So in this episode, we discussed Joshua Glasner's journey from vocal performance and pedagogy to research in clinical practice. And I shouldn't say journey from because his hands are still in all of those pots. We also discussed the importance of collaboration and mutuality in a trauma-informed approach. If you enjoy this episode of the Agentic Voice Podcast, please show your support by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform and to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care.